Okay, good afternoon to all of our members and everybody else that's in attendance today. Thank you for taking the time to join us as we delve into a very topical subject today, but that of course about business continuity planning. The COVID-19 pandemic and the subsequent national lockdown has certainly thrusted the importance of business continuity into the spotlight. Our discussion will focus on the importance of business continuity planning, and it will highlight some of the more practical considerations that we have to take into account when designing a plan. As members, and of course anybody else that's in attendance today, you'll get access to a BCP template and then also a work from home guide. We're going to try and stick to our 60-minute allocation. So in the interest of time, please make notes. We've deactivated the mic function for all the attendees. So please make use of the chat function on Zoom to fire off any questions that you might have. The format of the session is going to be as follows. We're going to try and stick to 40 minutes, or at least the initial 40 to 45 minutes to get through the content that our speaker has prepared for us. Then we're going to move into a Q&A session where we'll try to get through as many of the questions as we possibly can. The session is being recorded and it will be made available shortly. My name is Marlon Goss and I'm head of PPS Specialist Support Services. So at Specialist Support Services, we're a team of financial planning professionals who provide expert support, advice, and financial planning services to our high and ultra high net worth members and of course the intermediaries. We specialize in the fields of business planning, retirement and investments, estate and holistic financial planning, and we also offer a administration service. My co-host and our speaker for today has been practicing as a business continuity management and ICT continuity professional at least since 2003. Giving her roughly somewhere in the region of about 17 years experience. She is a director at Morgan Solus, which provides specialist consulting services on crisis management, business continuity, disaster recovery, resilience, and business continuity management software. She's been awarded the Continuity and Resilience at least Consultant of the Year award in 2016 and then again in 2018, and has been nominated twice as Personality of the Year for the Business Continuity Institute of Africa Awards in 2017 and then also in 2018. The experience includes local and provincial government, financial services, healthcare, entertainment, retail, mining, and then also telecoms. Tracy Little, welcome.
Thanks, Marlon. I appreciate the introduction and the opportunity to be able to talk to the members today and to share some information around business continuity. It's obviously a very topical subject at the moment, and we couldn't be in a better place in history to be dealing with this type of issue, considering what's going on around us with the lockdown, with COVID-19, and some of the challenges that we're really having to deal with. What I'm going to be going through today during the session is really just give the members some insight into what is business continuity, why is it needed, and what do you need to put in place for potential risks. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what companies have been doing around COVID-19 in the last 2 or 3 weeks, and what might be coming up for us next week when we get a message from the president on an update. So I'm going to jump into the business continuity presentation and talk to you about a couple of items. Okay, so does it really matter? I think we can all admit that at this point in time, we know that business continuity is an absolutely critical discipline and thing that needs to be put in place before an incident actually happens. We've had a number of organizations that we've been speaking to in the last 2 weeks, from small SMEs through to medium-sized organizations and large corporates, where without business continuity in place, they've really taken quite a knock. And it's taken them a significant amount of time to actually be able to recover their operations and get into a state of proper operational capability. So, I think it's very evident that business continuity is a requirement. So if I step back a little bit and give you some context, when I was a business continuity manager well over 10 years ago, I think life was a lot simpler. We had to deal with things that were more isolated, like fires, floods, isolated IT failures. Obviously, then it started to get a little more complex, and we started to have to deal with things like, the war against terrorism. And as you'll see on my timeline there, obviously the one that's popped up over the last couple of years has been pandemic flu. Now, we're no strangers to this. We have been on the periphery of seeing, SARS come out from the east. We've had Ebola outbreaks in Africa. But I think obviously now with COVID-19, it's really hit home being a real international pandemic disease. And really what we're facing now, as you see on my graph as we go across, is that because the world is now so interconnected, we now have the situation where the complexity of our risks has significantly increased. It's no longer just having to deal with an isolated fire in one part of South Africa. We're now having a situation where if there's a disaster internationally, and you can see my example there, if you remember the earthquake and the nuclear disasters that happened in Japan, all of those type of international incidents are actually affecting our businesses here in South Africa. So we can't be complacent about thinking that these things are not going to affect you and I as organizations. So it's also not just about what has happened internationally. As most of you are aware, if you've been following some of the news, I've given some examples on this slide, and probably the one that stands out for me just initially is the one that's in the middle with the Business Day title. It talks about, I think it was in 2010, 2011, the Italtile executive team went on a retreat. The whole management team was in the airplane, and unfortunately it went down. Now, they lost their entire management team, which means that the strategic focus of their organization got wiped out instantaneously. They were actually in a very compromised position where, because of that loss of skill set, they now had to figure out how are they going to recover, who was going to replace those lost individuals, what succession planning was in place. And it was really quite an interesting scenario. They luckily did come back and they've done quite well, but it's a very good example for us to take into account what happens when we lose skill sets. Some of you are going to be familiar with some of the other examples there. We've got the fire at the Tracker building, which was quite a few years ago. I'm probably giving my age away. We also had the SARS fire in Durban, as well as, if you can remember, we had that very, very large-scale fire that happened at the Metrofile warehouse in Durban. So these things are not just isolated to international and multinational companies. These can happen inside our own companies. And it's something that we have to be prepared to be able to handle. Okay, so why are we doing this thing called business continuity? I think I've probably alluded to it a little bit already. But if you have a look at the picture that I put up in the slide presentation, most organizations really are in business because we're here to make money. We need to pay salaries, earn income so we can, obviously enjoy our lives and purchase things. But we also have shareholders and stakeholders, and they're looking for returns from organizations. Now, if we have a look at the picture, you'll see on the top right-hand side that we've got the scenario where we won't exist if we don't have customers that are purchasing products and services from us. So it's really vital that we understand what those products and services are, and if we have an interruption to those products or services, what will it mean to our customers and consumers? Now, if you think about it, and I'm going to give you just a silly example, and I can do this. Anybody raise their hands who still owns a BlackBerry? I'm pretty sure there's almost 0 to 1% out there that even has a BlackBerry. And you ask yourself, well, why is that? If those of you that can recall, in 2010, BlackBerry had a major IT system outage. For 4 days, their IT applications and their environment went down. Now, if you can remember back to those days, you were not cool unless you had a BlackBerry. They were the only service provider that was doing email and instant messaging. It was actually quite the crux of the business environment because they were down for 4 days in a row. And also they didn't do a great job at their crisis management. They were very slow to respond and communicate to their customers and stakeholders. What happened is that you and I as consumers, and if you follow my picture, we decided we're not prepared to wait any longer. Competitors came up with better ideas. And so what happened is we moved with our feet to competitors, changing brands. I mean, you've seen the proliferation of Nokia, of Samsung, iPhone. I mean, they really did storm the market after that. All consumers actually stopped buying. Now, as an organization, none of us want to be in that position. So really, the idea that we're talking about here is that we put business continuity plans and preparation and solutions in place ahead of an incident, so that if we do have an interruption, the impact is not as significant as what it would be as if we were just responding cold. Okay. For those organizations, and we've seen it during COVID-19, that really struggled to get operational again, the financial impact on the organization has been quite substantial. And what does that mean to the average staff member? It could result in job cuts, salary cuts, and no bonuses. So, when we talk to organizations about business continuity, we try to relay the message that, this is not just an executive or a risk or an IT involvement. It's actually down to every staff member to benefit, and they will get the benefit from having business continuity in place. So hopefully that just gives you some context. Okay, so what are we looking at when we unpack this business continuity and this idea of business resilience? We, in essence, look at it holistically as 4 different areas, and I'm quickly going to step through them. If you follow me on the slide, I'm going to start on the top left, which is the emergency response. So if I give you an example, let's say inside your own practices or your organizations or corporates, we have a scenario where maybe we have a fire or a flood. One of the first things that we've got to do, and remember, it's people first. Got to get people out the building, make sure that they're safe, do roll call, make sure it's all good. Then the second hump that we talk about, which is the mustardy yellow color, is the crisis management. This is really about how does your organizational executive team come together as a crisis management team or a strategic team, and how are they going to respond to the incident? What are they telling stakeholders? What are they telling the board? What are they telling media? How are we communicating internally? Where's our focus going to be? How do we prioritize? So really important that those teams come together. And I can tell you now, with my discussions through lots of corporates and organizations, the assembly of their crisis management team has been one of the saving issues or graces that has allowed them to effectively respond to COVID-19. Then we get onto the purple hump, which is the top right-hand side. And this really is where the traditional business continuity space sits. What we're looking at here is if we have this interruption to our business functions and our processes, how are we going to recover them and in what order? So are we going to recover payroll before we recover something like talent management? Those sort of answers we want to have available to us before we actually get into a disaster scenario. Now, if you think about any organization, and it's true in ours as well, in order to execute our critical functions, we require support resources. These are typically things like the skill sets, the people that do these things, equipment, the premises we operate from, our suppliers that provide to us, and also our IT and data. And I'm going to get onto those 6 pillars in a little bit to explain what I mean by those. But then just conclude the slide and I talk about the items below. We're really looking at an IT DR type of impact here. So this is IT disaster recovery. It's very much in the technical IT space. And this is really where your IT teams should be focused on backing up your data, failing over the applications to alternate environments, and testing and making sure that if we have a significant outage, our IT applications and data is able to continue functioning. So those are really the 4 pillars that underpin our business resilience concept. I probably alluded to this slide already, but it really does just illustrate why business continuity is important. If you follow the line across to where the red incident bubble is, you'll see that those people that have those organizations and those companies that have put business continuity in place, what actually happens is, although the impact does still happen, it is reduced. So they're able to respond a lot quicker and can actually return to normal much faster than those who you can see the non-resilient or the little red stripy lines, where those organizations have hit rock bottom, 0% operational, and have now had to figure it out over a much longer period of time and then only return to business as usual. So that's just a nice illustrative slide that covers reducing the impact. Okay, so stepping into the 6 pillars and what is it that we need to protect if you're looking at your organization and wanting to put business continuity in place. The first one, obviously premises. Now, in your practices, in your organization, in your corporates, most of us are either operating from home or from a physical office. We could have situations where we are impacted by fire, flood. We could have power outages. Obviously, we're quite well versed in dealing with Eskom power outages, having generators in place, etc. But also now this lockdown scenario with COVID-19, we're having to deal with and be able to answer the question, where will your people operate from if your primary premises are not available? So what we have seen, and some of the solutions that organizations have put in place ahead of time, is that you organize and you sort out what your work from home requirements are going to be. Transitioning people from desktops to laptops to enable that work from home capability. Other organizations have gone for what we call geographic separation. In other words, and like the big banks, what they've done is they've taken their call center environments, they've actually split them into 2 halves so that they reduce the impact of one site being affected. So let's say, for argument's sake, the call center in Johannesburg is affected. That means that the call center in Durban is not affected and we're still operating at 50%. So there are a number of different solutions that you can put in place to mitigate the risk of losing your premises. Okay, the second pillar that we talk about, and I think I mentioned this when we were talking about Itzaltal, for me is probably one of the most understated pillars in the business continuity area and really does need a lot of focus. And it has become very evident during COVID-19 that this is something that needs more focus from a lot of corporates and organizations. It's around skill sets. So you can have as much automation as you want in place. Somewhere behind the scenes, we've still got human beings that are processing, operating, fixing, and dealing with the functions that need to be able to continue to service our customers with the products and services that we deliver. So when we look at loss of skill sets, it could be as a result of a number of things, and you can see the examples that I've provided there. Again, South Africans, we're very resilient. We've had to deal with protest marches, so we understand the impact of losing a segment of our skill sets and having to potentially use a solution like outsourcing those responsibilities to other companies in the interim while the protest is ongoing. We could have a scenario where there's illness. We may have, like we've got now, where we've got a pandemic scenario. And luckily, you know, we're very lucky in the situation we're in that our infection rate has been quite low, and thankfully also our death rate. But the reality is some of the other organizations and some of the bigger countries have had to deal with a loss of skill sets inside their organizations as a result of COVID. And the big question you've got to be asking yourselves is, if I lose these skill sets, and please understand it doesn't necessarily need to be because they die, it could be because they're inaccessible or unavailable, how am I going to replace those lost skill sets? And I'm talking about, you know, critical skill sets. It could be your machine operator that only knows how to use your anesthetic machine. It could be anything like that that is really critical skill sets that we have to have plans in place to be able to deal with it.
So basically, let me just chip in here. I mean, 2 things quickly. So for our audience and our members, please don't forget to use the chat function at the base of your screens. If you hover your cursor over the base of the screen, you're going to get an option. Use the chat function, and of course, that in turn you can use if you have any questions that you want to have us address towards the end of the session. Now, Tracy, in my mind, replacing lost skills is probably one of the most challenging of all our business continuity pillars to address. You being a business continuity practitioner, tell me, how do you address this in your own practice?
So Marlon, I mean, that's a great question. So to give you some context, we are 2 directors in our organization, myself and another gentleman by the name of Peter, and we have 8 consultants. So what we've done is we have cross-skilled our consultants, and they're based in Cape Town, in Durban, in Joburg, and in Botswana. So they're all covered from a multi-skilling, cross-skilling perspective. from Peter and myself, so what we've done there is Peter's very much our technical specialist. He's also our developer on our software. We have upskilled 2 developers to actually assist him to make sure that we have redundancy in the skill set around development and supporting our business continuity software. On my side, it's a little more of a specialist skill from a sales and a consulting perspective. So we're busy into my role. And what we've done is we've acknowledged that during this time, there is a slight gap. We are slightly at risk. And what we actually decided to do is we took out key man insurance and buy and sell agreements. So that kind of covers us from an exposure point of view at the director and at the executive level of our business.
So, I think, Tracy, from a long-term insurance or risk perspective, and in particular when we look at business planning, so there's a number of what we call wealth-altering events with that have certain triggers. Triggers where the primary effect is normally felt by the owner or the estate of the owner, and then invariably over time there's a bit of a lag, but there is most definitely a secondary effect, and that secondary effect will affect the business. It will affect the remaining owners, and of course it will affect the remaining staff. So I think you made mention of business assurance, 2 types in particular. The question is, what is business assurance? So it's a policy. It's a type of insurance. It's long-term insurance that is designed to protect the business and its owners from the, very importantly, I think, the financial consequences of death, ill health, or infirmity of an owner or a key person. The lives that we cover is not just limited to the owner, but it could also be a director or an employee. Typically, we would structure solutions. We'd use one of 4 different solutions, or we'd use a combination of them. This includes buy and sells, key person assurance, contingent liability, and then credit loan protection. So I think for our purposes, and in particular with regards to our discussion today, there's 2 that are very important in this particular instance. The first one I want to look at is key person insurance. So what is key person insurance? It's a company-owned policy, meaning the business itself owns it. It pays the premiums for it as well. And it insulates the business against the financial impact of losing an employee. Cover will typically be sought for someone who has, like in your case, either rare or very specialist skills. So someone that it will take a very long time to replace. And then you can also look at covering employees that make a significant impact to the bottom line of your business. This could be a sales director, a top specialist, someone that brings in a disproportionately high percentage of your revenue. Then, of course, we also provide protection for the owners. Not just the owners, but of course their businesses, their estates, and the remaining partners or shareholders in the form of what we call a buy and sell agreement. Now, the buy and sell is a contract that is entered into between the owners of the business. Very importantly, it binds the estate of the deceased owner to sell his or her business interest at a predetermined price. It also binds the remaining owners to buy that interest at that set price. Now, the entire arrangement is funded by an insurance policy. So this, of course, makes it extremely cost-effective as an option to inject the liquidity that you would need to buy at the interest of the affected owner. So up to this point, we've covered 2 of your 6 pillars. I remember you started off by talking about premises, and then we also highlighted the importance of having a plan in place to relocate your operations. We then moved to skill sets and the question of how to build resilience and strategy, and the strategies that we could put in place around mitigating the risk of the loss of core skill sets. What's the next pillar, Tracy?
Thanks, Marlon. Yeah, absolutely. So looking at the third pillar that we talk about is equipment. Now, I'm not talking about the pens and the paper. I'm really talking about the critical specialized equipment that you use in your organization. And And I know that a number of your members come from that kind of environment, you know, whether it's our doctors, anesthesiologists, radiologists, etc. You've got very specialist equipment that you're using. Now, the question is, how will you replace that equipment if it's damaged? Some companies, obviously, they deploy solutions like putting spares in place and making sure they've got sufficient stock. You can also purchase the items after an incident has actually happened. And you'll see that I've spoken about the fact that equipment can be affected a number of different ways. You know, you could have just normal damage, you could have flood, you could have power issues, power spikes that could affect your equipment. And what we've seen quite an intake or increase in is cyber threat against your equipment. So what is happening is those organizations that are using something called operational technology. Now, it is slightly different to IT. So OT, or operational technology, is actually the mechanisms and the mechanics behind your equipment. It's normally known as PLC or SCADA, that actually operates your big machinery. Now, the cyber guys have decided this is a great idea to now hack these machines from the internet. And you'll see my picture on the right-hand side there where I've got, that's actually a dryer of raw materials. So what happens is they can actually access the core machinery through the internet, and they can actually influence the mixing ratios, how much ingredients is added, et cetera, et cetera. Now, you can imagine if that is a very sensitive product that you're putting together, that could have massive reputational, financial, all sorts of damage on your organization. So we are seeing an increase in, you know, cyber-related attacks on equipment. We had a very interesting example of equipment on one of the projects we did a number of years ago. We did some work with the National Health Laboratory Services. Now, for those of you guys, you should know them. They do all the testing, etc. They're linked to the NICD. We did a project with them, and one of the critical pieces of equipment, and I say equipment, that we identified is they actually have a stable of horses on their premises. And we noticed that they are one of the key revenue generators for the organization. And if they got equine flu, they would be in a serious, serious position, because what actually happens is at the start of the year, the scientists, they actually inject the horses with snake venom. And so what happens is over the course of a day and a month and a week, and eventually after a year, the horses actually develop the antibodies. Then what the scientists do is they withdraw those antibodies from the horses, and then that's what gets used for you and I if we get a snake bite. Now, if you think about it, if those horses get equine flu, they will basically lose that entire product or service that they're offering the public. So how do we come up with a solution? Obviously put our heads together, decided, okay, let's think about this. And what did we do? We actually ended up suggesting that they separate the horses into two separate physical locations to reduce the likelihood of the entire horse fleet being impacted by a scenario such as equine flu. So that's just a practical example and a slightly interesting one for you. So moving on from that, we go on to the fourth pillar, which is talking about documentation. Now, we're not seeing a lot of this anymore. It used to be very prevalent. And what I mean by documentation is actually physical hard copy documentation, that if destroyed in a fire or a flood, is going to pose a significant risk for your organization. Now, some of you may still be dependent on paper, you know, like our psychologists, etc., where they're taking down their notes and then only transcribing them into electronic formats later on. Really what we're saying here is, please consider the risk if your critical documentation for some other reason gets destroyed and you need access to it. Some of the solutions that we've seen organizations doing is going through, and yes, it is quite a tedious thing to do, but go through a big scanning project and indexing. You know, put these documents online and available so that staff can actually get to them through electronic means. Excuse me. Okay, and then moving on to the next one, which we've seen a lot of traction on during COVID-19, is really to do with suppliers. And this is very much about how do the organizations external to us continue to service us during an incident where they've had a disruption. There's a great example that is used in the business continuity space. If those of you that can remember are aware of it, in 2018, KFC in the UK actually decided to change their transport distributors. I think they were with Bidfest and then they moved across to DHL. Now, the risk that they faced there is DHL only had one warehouse. And what happened was on the weekend that they did the switchover, they actually had an IT glitch as well. So on the Monday morning when they were going to collect stock and take it out to the stores, they couldn't actually get the trucks into the factory to be able to pick up stock. So what happened? For the next week in the UK, 900 stores, 900 KFC stores, no chicken. This had quite a big social impact on the community in the UK. I mean, I remember reading articles about people saying they were going to the Metro Police to find out why the KFC isn't open. Now, that is a classic example of where an external third-party supplier can actually impact our own organization's ability to service our customer. So really critical, if it's now, if it's during COVID-19, asking all these questions, is your supplier still able to service you? Okay, quite an important one to make sure that you do look after. And Marlon, I know you and I were talking, I mean, how have you guys handled the supplier scenario from a PPS perspective?
I think at all the pillars that we're covering today, this is the only one that, for all intents and purposes, focuses on the value chain sort of upstream. We were asking the question, what actually happens above us at a supplier level, or what is it that we need to do or what are the things or strategies that we need to put in place to ensure that we have stability in our supply. At PPS, I think we certainly discovered the value of having a well thought out and properly designed business continuity plan during the lockdown. As the news of the lockdown broke, what we found is that suddenly there was a massive sort of short supply of laptops. So we've got a lot of core functions that historically they work from desktop machines in their own offices. Now, of course, we've got this lockdown thing we've got to deal with, and all of them need to move to a type of a work from home type arrangement. And of course, we've got the supply issue. So fortunately, the executive, together with our COVID-19 command team, they instituted our own business continuity plan. The good news is that within a week, we were able to secure all the machines we needed. Not just the machines, we were also able to secure all the 3G cards that we needed. So I think this laptop situation, I mean, it was a real threat to our business, in that we would not have been able to run many of our core, albeit non-essential service type functions without it. So on the subject of hardware and connectivity, talk to us a bit about IT and data.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously the sixth pillar and one that's quite fundamental and underpins a lot of the other 6 pillars is IT and data. So this is really talking to that technical layer I was talking about with our IT teams, how they're backing up the data. And obviously there's a threat to those environments as well. You know, we could have a situation of fire, water, flooding, connectivity, and of course we all know about the cyber events. I often get asked, well, you know, isn't this a 1 in 25-year event? And I say, no. We've had clients in the last 3 years have over 18 incidents inside their business. Now, that might just be bad luck, but a lot of organizations are experiencing significant incidents. In the IT space, we had a situation where a client in the UPS space, in the data center, they had a spark on the UPS battery bank. What it did is it actually triggered a slight smoke. And of course, as you know, in the data center environment, your gas canisters then release. Okay, so thankfully it wasn't a serious fire, the gas canisters released, and the environment was actually okay. There weren't too many issues. But then what happened was to replace that piece of equipment, which just happened to be an internationally sourced piece of equipment, and now I'm going back to suppliers, they could not replace that part for 6 months. Okay, which means that their backup capability was significantly impacted and at risk. So it really is important that the IT environment is taken care of. It falls under the traditional IT disaster recovery side. What I do want to mention, please talk to your IT teams. It is important that you convey the message to them that the requirement for how quickly they're operational, how much data they're backing up, is actually a business requirement. It is up to you as business owners, as team leaders, as lines of business, to be able to go to your IT teams and say, our tolerance for downtime is 4 hours. We cannot lose 2 days worth of data. It must be driven by business need. Traditionally, IT environments have been backed up and set up just by what the IT departments thought was required. We're really seeing a transition now where it's become more of a negotiation and a dual responsibility between business and IT to look after this environment. So please ask yourself the question, how will you restore your data and recover your IT applications? There are many, many solutions in place, whether it's, I'm getting a bit technical now, asynchronous replication, all sorts of things like this, or you have a hot site, a warm site, a cold site. Your IT guys will know about these kind of options. And if you're needing your assistance and you're not sure about them, you can always just give us a shout as well. So, those are the core underlying 6 pillars. What we find as well, just wrapping up the 6 pillars, and I've seen it happen during COVID-19, is a lot of companies have invoked their business insurance policies. So, your business interruption policies, which is really covering the loss of one or multiple of these pillars. So, I'm not an expert on business assurance. So, Marlon, I understand that this is something that you're familiar with.
Yeah, so Tracy, I wouldn't say I'm familiar with it. My background is risk and investments, long-term risk and investments. But I think to your point, the loss of equipment or something as critical as the loss of your premises, the impact is devastating. And the impact's not only devastating on your operations, it's also devastating. Well, it can have a devastating impact on the financial position of your business. So commercial insurance policies typically should include something which we call business interruption cover. Now, the cover is designed to not only protect the insured against material damage or loss, but it's also associated with any kind of consequential loss. So the cover that you could typically apply for could make provision for meeting your fixed cost obligations. More still, you could look at applying for cover that would cover your net profit. So the net profit I'm talking about is the net profit that you would have earned if you had continued training or trading at least under normal conditions. And then very importantly also, any kind of additional cost, the type of cost that you're going to incur to speed up your business recovery, those too can be financed. Now, this is a very, 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 very technical space. This being, of course, commercial short-term insurance. Now, I know in our own policy, the PPS short-term commercial insurance policy, there's 23 sections. Now, you want to make sure that when you are getting your business or your practice covered, that you speak to a professional. You need to make sure that you are speaking to a specialist. So, in short-term insurance, as I'd say with most things in life, you really get what you pay for. Goedkoop, there's an Afrikaans saying that goedkoop is duurkoop. And that certainly rings true when you're talking short-term. I look at my own short-term insurance. I'm with a service provider who is in the market, is probably not even close to being one of the cheapest available. But I can tell you this much, looking at their trade, their claim records, their claims history, I feel safer being there than paying a lower premium. So while it's imperative that you source the right solution for you, you need to strike a balance somewhere in between providing adequate cover or protection against risk, while at the same time finding value for money. So we're quickly drawing to a close. We're reaching the end of the presentation. I'm just keeping my eye on the clock. It's now 12:40. So before we start taking questions, Tracy, please just take us through those 6 pillars again.
Sure, absolutely, Marlon. I see our screen has gone a little bit off. I'm just going to stop the share and restart it. It seems to be off just a little bit. Give me a sec. There we go. Okay, apologies for that. So just wrapping up, obviously we've spoken about the 6 pillars. And what we're really looking at here, as we've alluded to, is just making sure that when you consider business continuity for your organization, that you have addressed the loss of skill sets, the loss of premises, of documentation, equipment, third parties, and IT systems. So this is really just pulling it back together as a holistic approach. What I'm going to just do now is we obviously mentioned that there was going to be a business continuity template available. I'm conscious of time. I'm going to very, very quickly just show you what it looks like so that you can get a feel for it. And as mentioned, it is going to be made available during the post-webinar sessions. So hopefully you can all see my screen. It is a Word-based document. You're welcome to use it, to customize it for your organizations. It's obviously going to have the name of your department, who is responsible for recovering the business operations of that particular department. It's got the usual things like a purpose and scope, objectives and assumptions, which the auditors love to see. Okay, then we've also got things like criteria to activate your business continuity plan and authorization. Because we don't just want to activate your business continuity plan, you know, if someone stubs their toe in the corridor. It is really based on significant threats to the operations of the organization. We also look at what are the outcomes that we want to achieve from putting a business continuity plan in place. And then we also want to state what are the products and services that we're wanting to protect by putting business continuity in place. And I think I've kind of spoken about that during the presentation. Then we've got a crisis management team structure. So we have to put this in place. This is basically the hierarchy in which we respond. On the right-hand side, we've got an example of a flowchart. So from the time of receiving notification of the incident, right through to actually looking at, you know, what are the 6 pillars that have been affected and what solutions do we now need to deploy. The next section is really just the verbiage that is linked to the flowchart. So I'm not going to go through it for the sake of time. Obviously, when we issue this, you're more than welcome to have a read through it. Scrolling down a bit. Then what we do is we come into the section where we start answering all those questions that I had under the 6 pillars. What are our critical functions? What is linked to them? The suppliers, the equipment, IT systems, and how are we actually going to put these down? Next section looks at the summary functions and recovery times. If you remember, I spoke about the fact that if it's the 7th of the month, our payroll function is actually absolutely critical, but ironically, towards the 26th and 27th of the month, it actually isn't, because they go into a lull at that point. So it really is important for each of the functions to understand where their peaks and deadlines are. Then we go into the remainder of the 6 pillars, which really says, okay, around the skill sets, what are the questions and answers we need to put in place? So I'm not going to repeat this again. It's a lot of the information that I spoke about when we were doing the 6 pillars. We've put some questions in there to guide you. So what you just need to do is have a look at the questions and answer them in the sections below. So you'll see we go into premises and equipment as we've gone through the actual pillars as we discussed. Then on the back end, we've got what's obviously very important is your contact details for your critical suppliers, as well as for your staff members. Now, interestingly enough, we've had situations in the last 2 weeks where we've had small, medium, and even large companies, and I'm talking about, you know, 1,400 staff members, where because their staff members are now so physically separated, some of them don't have access to email. They have no way of communicating with them. We reached out to them. We, luckily, because of our business continuity software, we have a functionality inside it where we can bulk send SMSs. So the SMS goes out to a handset. It doesn't have to be a smartphone. And the guys can actually then reply back. So it is a two-way communication. This has been one of the big things I've certainly taken away from the last 2 weeks is communication and how important it is to be able to reach all staff members of all different categories inside your organization. Okay, and then I think as I alluded to, there's obviously a couple of other documents that are linked to your business continuity plan. You have a crisis management plan, your emergency response, your ITDR plans. Okay, so that's really the template itself that will be distributed to everybody. So coming back to the presentation, I think it's really just a case of wrapping it up so we can do some questions. And this is one of those quotes that I think everybody's familiar with, but it really does ring true. You know, those who fail to plan, you know, plan to fail. So Marlon, I think, that's kind of a wrap up from my side, from the kind of content side. Very happy for you to take questions.
And just before we get there, you made mention of your software. Now, I'm sure there are many members like me in attendance who are not too fond of paper and who prefer the benefits that comes with automation and also instant access that would come with having an application. Take us briefly through the features and the benefits of your software.
Sure. So really just high level, what we've done is we've automated the business continuity process in terms of the data gathering and the storage of information. So it all goes into an online software as a service solution where obviously plan owners, the crisis management team, everybody can access that data. They can turn it into rich data so they can actually see how to respond. And then what we did is we just built a business continuity app, which goes on your mobile phone, which really gives you the capability to use the data that we've gathered with the solutions. You can do your bulk messaging, you can do all of that through the mobile app. And you can actually real time give an indication to your line manager and to the crisis management team whether you've recovered your function, your skill sets, your equipment. So it's just an enabler to help with the business continuity process.
Okay. I think at this point, thanks for that, Tracy. I think at this point we are properly out of time. We've overshot our time limit by about 7 minutes, but that's okay. So we're gonna start taking some questions now. I've got some questions that have been fired off to me and moved to my phone. So I'm just gonna start at the top and then I'm gonna start working my way down. The first question is from a Marianne Jacqueline.
Yeah, no, well, we're in the...
I guess Marianne Jacqueline is I think it's going to be addressed to both myself and you, Tracy. So the question is, how do you suggest protecting skill set in a sole prop when you're the only person in the business? Income protection perhaps is question mark. So I think the very nature of a sole prop makes it challenging. The fact that from a legal and I think a taxation and an income perspective, there's no real separation between the business owner, the business, and his personal estate. It's one thing. So I think therein lies the real challenge. So now, Marianne, I must agree with you that one of the strategies that you can implement is income protection. We've got something called SPPI, which is a sickness protection benefit that you could use, very appropriate. And you could use that to provide an income for yourself. And alternatively, I mean, if you have any administrative staff in the business that can pick them over until you recover. Tracy, maybe just talk about, I'm thinking this is a typical scenario, Marianne's a scenario where I think for the measures that we implement to mitigate, she's going to have to build a bit more resilience inside of a business. One of the things that you mentioned was cross-skilling, upskilling, things like that. I think on my side, insurance alone is not going to solve all our business risk issues. Certainly, there's other stuff, Tracy.
So thanks, Martin, and thanks for the question. Yeah, sole proprietary is definitely a tricky one. Look, the reality is, unless there's anybody else actually actively involved in the business, your hands really are tied. I mean, I think the best thing you can do is put some sort of insurance cover in place. If you are wanting to grow the organization, obviously you need to move out of the sole proprietor into a PTY LTD, and then hopefully start growing the business. But if your strategy is to remain as a sole proprietor, the other thing that you could look at is really documenting what you do very effectively, and having some sort of handover plan to, I don't know if it's a next in kin or someone that's in the industry that you potentially might think about selling your business to, eventually down the line. So you could look at some of those options as well. I know one of the questions that's come out quite a bit lately as well around COVID-19 is, what do sole proprietors do? Because they're not classified as a company and not part of a CIPC registration. I think watch the space. My understanding is that they are taking it into account, because obviously sole proprietors are as badly affected as the remaining, companies and small SMEs.
So, to your point, Tracy, I agree. Sole props are difficult, but Marian, we made mention about bringing skill sets into your business, and it's not irregular for us to get requests from sole props for buy and sell agreements. Can be done. So typically, what we call we would implement what we call a one-sided buy and sell. The one-sided buy and sell, for all intents and purposes, allows an employee, and therefore for you to get the full tax benefits of a normal buy and sell, there needs to be a transaction that happens between owners. And now, of course, in the instance where you're having a sole prop who's the owner 100%, and then having somebody else who could be an employee wanting to take over the business, all those benefits with regards to a taxation perspective, estate duty, etc., no longer exist. But with the one-sided buy and sell, all we do is we inflate the cover amount to compensate for that. So those agreements can still be in place, and it can still be funded by insurance, albeit that you're gonna pay a bit more because you have to increase the cover limit or the cover amounts that would be necessary to buy at the owner's interest. The alternative is having the business completely die when you're no longer there, and it stops just there. There's no way for it to continue. Instead, for all intents and purposes. We've got another question, members and Tracy. It's a similar question. It seems to be also around sole props. It's from a Sonia Berry. Sonia's question is, she's involved in the medical field. She's a sole prop. Would it be necessary to insure herself as a key person? So I should probably take this as well, Tracy, unless you wanna chip in.
So I mean, my honest answer would be yes, absolutely. I mean, like I said, in our business, that's exactly what we've done.
100%. So as a company-owned policy, these policies are designed to pay at a lump sum to compensate the business for the financial impact of the loss of a key person. So now, with that said, generally, what happens in practice is the premiums are paid from money that is not being taxed. In other words, it's a correction. You do not claim a tax deduction on those premiums. So that should the insured event occur, the proceeds will pay at net of tax. Now, one of the issues that you're going to have if you're a sole prop is that there is one exception to this, or one of the exceptions to this arrangements are instances where ownership vests in what we call a family company. So a family company would be a company where either a group of people, owners, directors, or at least shareholders, or alternatively a situation where you have a situation where one person controls more than 50% of the interest in that particular entity. It's going to be classified as a company-owned business. In that instance, once again, all the tax advantages that you typically would enjoy under a situation where there's, for normal key person assurance, which is not a family-owned company, those fall away. But once again, we can compensate for it. We increase, there's a little calculation that one of our specialists will do for you, alternatively your financial advisor or your broker, that will factor in the potential taxes that you might have to pay, or that the company will have to pay on the proceeds, and then of course you can still enjoy the benefit. Tracy, is there anything else you want to add on that?
No, Martin, I think you've done a great job. I see there's another question that's come through from Brian. I thought I'd pick this one up. He did address it to you, but I think there's two parts to it, so I suppose we can both answer it. So Brian's just asked, obviously my example with the Etal and the praying crash, is it advisable to have a designated survivor who does not travel? So Brian, absolutely. I mean, as I mentioned with the two partners in our company, when we travel to Cape Town or we do events, we actually go on separate flights. We don't go in the same car together. Now, I know it has increased costs, but if you think of the consequence of not doing it and one of us not being available to continue to lead the organization, the cost is minimal in the bigger scheme of things. So we highly advocate, you do not put critical skills in a single transport mechanism, vehicle, and expose them at any point.
Okay, thanks, Tracy. So now I've got another question, and I'm going to make an assumption on some of it. So the question comes from Benele Shakwana. Benele wants to know, what is the difference between business continuity versus STI? So, Tracy, in your world, is there anything called STI? Because in my world, STI is short-term insurance. I'm going to assume it's short-term insurance.
I actually saw that question. I wasn't sure what Benele meant by STI.
So I think, let's assume it's short-term insurance.
Yes. Okay, so definitely. So let me give you an example. So short-term insurance is a mechanism to handle a significant disruption or events. But understand that all it is it's a reactionary process. Yeah. Your services and your operations are still going to go down. So yeah, you can claim and you can get some money for it. But in the meantime, and use my BlackBerry example, TikTok, you're not servicing your customer, which is the business continuity side of it. And eventually you might reach the point, well, by the time your insurance pays out, you've actually been down for so long that the customer has gone elsewhere.
No, 100%. And I think to my point earlier, all of these financial products that you mentioned earlier on, the long-term stuff, the business assurance, the commercial short-term insurance, their role is to purely provide some level or degree of insulation or protection against the financial impact of these risks. But of course, I reckon there's a whole lot that we can do prior to that insured event occurring. And this is exactly why we're having this discussion today. So that in addition to providing protection against the financial impact, we can actually implement measures that will mitigate or seriously reduce the not just financial, but also the operational impact critically, I think, of these events. I've got another question from a Sonia Berry. Now, this is gonna be for me, Tracy. And as I said earlier, so I'm not a short-term specialist, not at all, not by a long shot. Sonia Berry's question is, we've been in contact with our short-term insurer. Looks like the name is Loophole. We did not specify infection. Is there any other option we can try, Sonia Berry? So Sonia, me not being a specialist at all, what I'm going to recommend is we've got some of our colleagues in the background that are busy administering the session. We're going to take your details. What I'll do is I will get a short-term specialist to reach out to you. So it's not a short-term broker, far from it. It's not an advisor. It's a specialist. It's somebody that would typically support an advisor or broker. And I think it would be safer if they get the details from you and perhaps just review your portfolio with a view to giving you options. Wow, our time is up. I don't know about you, but this is Tracy. That went very quick and quite a few more.
It did. It did. I see, Martin, sorry, just there's one last question that's popped up. Maybe we can just extend by a minute or two. Sure. Just how often should your company revisit your business continuity plan? That's from Smiley Marais.
Yes.
So the future changes fast. So absolutely. What the recommendation is from an industry standard perspective is that it depends on the nature of your business, but normally you update your business continuity plan. To be honest, your staff contacts every month, but the actual crux of your business continuity plan, either annually, right, or every time you have a significant change in your organization. So that could be a restructure, it could be onboarding a new product, and it could be any sort of major thing that actually influences one of those 6 pillars. So it is a bit fluid, and you just have to adapt it to your organization.
Okay. Thanks, Tracy. I think thank you for this very informative topical discussion. For me, certainly, I've learned a lot. And I think it's helped me to contextualize a lot of the content of PPS's own BCP plan. To our members and the other people in attendance, thank you for attending and making our webinar a success. You'll be receiving a mail shortly. In the mail, you're going to find the BCP template and then also the work from home guide that we promised. The mail will include a short survey. It's important that you please complete it. We really need it. It will give us some kind of indication around the level of satisfaction that you've experienced with the webinar. And then critically and very importantly, we are also going to be putting up a list of potential future video injects. I think we've currently have somewhere in the region of about 4 of them, which we'd like to make available to our members. Now, these will be shorter videos, not an hour or anything close like today, where instead we'll just have Tracy preparing some content for us that will typically run somewhere between 5 to 10 minutes. Now, your feedback here is critical in ensuring that the content that we put out is going to be content that's relevant and of value to you. Guys, thank you again for your time today. Stay safe. To those of you that are celebrating Easter this weekend, may you spend the time with people that really matters to you. God bless, and see you all hopefully soon. Thank you for your time.